of like go in the direction of what I think is applicable to you guys. Okay, if you want me to go in another direction, just let me know. Okay, so I was involved with Shell for 20 years, and I'm currently with Cecil, and I say as a retailer, I've been with Cecil for 3 years now. In my 20 years with Shell, I was the head of the dealer council for probably 10 years. So there are essentially two trading platforms in the fuel industry. There's what's called dealer-owned, and there's what's called company-owned. You guys will only play in the dealer-owned space. Okay, so if I say that, do you know what that means, that term?
Yeah.
So dealer-owned, in all filling station transactions, there are three parties. There's an oil company, there's an operator, and there's a landlord. Oil companies generally like to be the oil company, obviously, and the landlord. They like to be two parts of that transaction. You know, that's their business model. You guys don't play in that space. You play in the dealer-owned space. In its perfect form there, the landlord is the operator. In the perfect case, you know, in the white paper as to how it's meant to work, that would be the space that you guys play. So you guys get that?
Yeah.
Okay? In 2013, the margins in the fuel business changed, and they implemented a thing called RAS. Okay, and that's when the whole playing field, the rules of the game changed, and that's when dealers started selling sites. I'm saying started happening a lot. Okay, and in the auction space, it makes the most sense to trade a business, to trade a dealer-owned site through your platform. Okay, so I am dealer-owned. When I say I operate a dealer-owned site, I bought it in 1998. The licensing, what went on with getting an EIA, you know what that is, this environmental impact assessment, to develop a brand new filling station site is really onerous. It's very costly. So a lot of guys are taking the view now they'd rather just go and buy on an auction a site than try and redevelop it themselves.
Do the fuel companies still have any appetite for developing?
Okay, so there are a lot of interesting things around that. Certain oil companies are totally risk averse as far as owning land. They're not interested now. They just don't want it. So Sasol are of that opinion. They'd much rather buy volume. You go to them with another branded site, they'll give you a fantastic commercial offer. They'll rebrand your site and take it over. Because they don't want to have this open-ended cost. Will we get a license? Can we get power? Will we get services? You know, if you read the guideline on what it takes to build a new filling station. If I had to ask you, where in Johannesburg have you seen a brand new filling station being built? Not a knockdown rebuild, you know, not a revamp, but a brand new site. Is very, very difficult to get it right. You know, I mean, can anybody here think of a brand new site that they've seen? It's difficult. So that's the one part of it. The other part of it, which I want you guys to start understanding, is if you go to Mpumalanga, for example, you see what's called non-refining wholesalers who open retail sites. It's the non-branded sites. It's not Shell, BP, Celtics. It's things called Energy, FOSA, Gulf, Puma. So that's the very interesting thing which you guys need to understand, is that those guys operate, and I mean the proliferation of those sites in rural areas is massive. If you think about it in the last 15 years, when you go like to the Kruger National Park, you see those sites everywhere. There are hardly any branded sites left there. And that's where the success is. There, you need to understand how the margins work in this business to understand why dealer-owned sites are so saleable and why they transfer from the refining wholesalers, you know, the big brands like Shell and BP, to these no-name brand sites. Because what people don't understand in South Africa is the only thing that's regulated is the exit price, the pump price. So on the first Wednesday of every month, government publishes what the fuel changes are, and there's a thing called a zone differential. The zone differential is essentially the further away you are from the coast, the higher the cost of fuel is. So Gauteng is what's called zone 9C. Our fuel is more expensive than buying fuel at the coast. So what people also don't understand is you can't get all grades of fuel everywhere. You can't get 93 petrol at the coast. You can only buy it inland. So you may have seen in the media there's this massive talk around them re-regulating 93. Has anybody heard this? Okay, so the impact of that will be the biggest thing in the fuel business, certainly since I've been in the industry.
Deregulate.
So you need to understand that the Act in South Africa does not allow for self-service. Self-service means, like you see overseas. So in our margin, in this RAS matrix, there are lots of lines that make up the retail margin. The current retail margin is R2.28. Okay? So that R2.28, there's a line item for uniforms, for insurance, for cash deposit fees, do you understand? Which makes up that R2.28. So what they're saying is, and wages are one of those line items, is that with full deregulation would come self-service, and people would lose their jobs, 100%. So they're never going to allow that. So what they're going to do is they're going to have what they're going to call re-regulation. Re-regulation means on the first Wednesday of every month, as it's always been, there'll be the new price on 93, but you can sell it for anything less than that. So that is going to change the playing space, where a lot of guys are going to say, listen, we can't operate here and we're selling our site, where there's upside for you guys. So you need to be proactive about this thing and understand it. So if you've got your split on different sites, your mix between petrol and diesel, I'm saying your volumes, it's different. So this thing with the zone differential and the fuel margin, you're guaranteed to make your R2.28 on 95 petrol and 93 petrol. Diesel has always been deregulated. Okay? So no one now makes that full margin on diesel that they make on petrol. Originally, when I started in this industry, guys used to say, listen, my cost to operate, my salaries and wages, whether a petrol pump attendant is pumping diesel or petrol, it makes no difference. I need to make my margin to survive. But as it's evolved, guys have worked out that you're not going to sell a litre of diesel unless you drop your margin. So I can tell you there are very, very few people, if any, who make the R2.28 on a litre of diesel. So that's an interesting thing to understand. And when this thing gets brought in with 93, and I believe they're going to do it, a lot of garage owners are saying this, and I cannot believe they're going to do it. They're not going to do it. I don't believe they care, government. They're going to impose it. And it's going to change the playing field there, where a lot of guys are going to say, listen, that's it for me. I'm done. I'm out now. I cannot compete here.
When do you think that's going to happen?
I believe it's going to happen this year. So they've sent out...
next few months.
I believe as soon as October.
You spoke of the cost of rezoning.
Correct.
If a property was zoned for...
Public garage. So the official zoning is public garage. Okay. That's the zoning you need.
And so 20 years ago it was a garage, and now it's a bakery. Or
so
does it retain its zoning?
So that's a very good question. Zoning never changes, but you can't get exactly. So the Department of Energy issue you a license to operate. If you haven't operated a filling station in 3 years, you lose the EIA. So the zoning will stay zoned public garage, but you won't be able to get a license to operate. So there are two different operating licenses you get. You get what's called a retail license, which is basically the space that you guys play in, and you get a wholesale license. So it's absolute nonsense what goes on in the fuel industry. A commercial customer of an oil company can buy fuel much cheaper than we buy it. So people get confused when they say, isn't it regulated? The only thing that's regulated is the exit price at the pump. Yeah. So if you're a commercial customer, you're a mine, you can buy the same grade of diesel that I buy at R1.70 a litre cheaper from the same depot delivered in the same truck. And then the oil company says, but listen, I mustn't complain because they've paid for branding at my site and then adverts and they're sponsored by Bafana.
And they don't have the costs.
Well, but it's nonsense, because what's happened is when you go to industrial areas, you'll see buckies filling up at these diesel truck stops where they're not meant to. Those minimum fills are meant to be 1,500 litres in terms of your license. But no one enforces it. No one enforces it. So part of the reason that guys are getting out of it now and selling is because it's just a mess. It's a much more difficult space to operate. Guys who wholesalers are actually playing in the retail space, and they shouldn't be. It's very hard for a retailer. When I say a company-owned... So sorry if I go for a tangent. You must just tell me if you follow the conversation, okay? So company-owned, which is the other side of the trading platform, where the oil company owns the land, they will approve the retailer, and there's a very big transformation angle. Oil companies, all the oil companies now, have a big problem giving sites to white operators, previously disadvantaged South Africans, or the preference. So in 1990, they basically signed a charter with government, and they haven't been compliant with their charter in terms of transformation. Okay? So all the oil companies are under the same umbrella, and from the company-owned space, it's also a mess. There's a massive cost to capital getting into this business. They battle to raise funding to put the correct operators in sites, and that also has been a mess. But to give you an idea, those guys generally pay around 60 cents a litre in what they call a forecourt rental to an oil company. So of the R2.28, they must pay at least 60 cents to the oil company for their forecourt rental, and then the shop they'll have will be a branded shop, whether it's Shell with Select or, all their different brands, and you pay a royalty. It's basically 12% of turnover to the oil company. So do you understand the differences between the two trading platforms? Dealer-owned, you own everything outright.
You pay franchises.
You don't pay any franchise fees. They actually...
If you've got a brand like Woolworths,
okay, so that alliance, the Engine Woolworths alliance, is Engine have segmented their market. They're saying, listen, there's certain LSMs where we can put in a Woolworths store. But there, the margin gets split between the oil company and Woolworths.
yeah.
So if you've got how the oil company try and sell it to you, famous brands play in the filling station space. So say you put in a Steers or a Debonair's, you've got to pay both royalty. But the oil company won't charge you rent as well. So you'll pay them a royalty. But for me, you can either call it a royalty or a rental. It's the same expense. But you'll pay famous brands and you'll pay the oil company. The oil company say, but listen, well, you're not paying rent. But that's how they do it. They all do it the same way. They all do it the same way. So where I see opportunity for you guys is that when somebody phones or a conversation gets opened, you need to be aware of this thing. If it comes around with the 93, it's just going to put more pressure on guys. And I mean, if I drill down into that you understand it, what's going to happen is people are going to understand that the 93, 95 offer is all marketing bullshit. Okay? When you can save, I can tell you, when they do this thing with 93, that day I'll drop my price by R1 a litre. Okay? And it's already 23 cents a litre cheaper. So if you take the sensitivity of the current fuel price and you can buy 93 at a massively reduced price, and you put it in your car and you see there's going to be absolutely no difference, it's going to change it. And people are going to start buying more 93 and less 95, and the margins, the gross profit generation at sites is going to go down drastically. And guys are currently under massive, massive pressure, already. And this is just going to add to the pressure.
So that's great to convince people to sell. How do we convince people to buy?
No. So look, in the dealer-owned space, the space that you play, guys who are good operators understand the cash generation ability of these businesses. Okay? So these are very cash positive businesses if you operate it properly. And why there's this increase in these non-refining wholesalers is those guys buy fuel much cheaper than we buy fuel. So their cost of running a business is much lower. When they'll tell you a benchmark service station needs to be 300,000 litres, unless you're doing 300,000 litres, you can't. That's nonsense. If your cost of sales, if your litre that you buy is cheaper than my litre, you don't have to sell 300,000 litres. If you sell 200,000 litres, you can have a business there. If you're buying at R1.70 a litre cheaper. The other thing that guys need to understand is whenever somebody meets me and they say, you've got a filling station, they say, geez, don't you make all your money from your shop? It's like the standard thing that you get asked. It's absolute nonsense. You make all your money from your forecourt. No shop can give you the GP number that a forecourt can give you. It's impossible. Not the busiest shop in the country will give you what a forecourt generates. The money in the filling station space is on your forecourt. Everything else is a nice to have. It's not about, guys worry about the margins in the shop. This is the biggest nonsense. If a guy's doing a fortune in prepaid, there's no more money in prepaid. When I started, you used to make 10% in prepaid. what guys don't understand is people don't even buy prepaid airtime anymore. It's all data. And there's no money in it. There's no money in prepaid electricity and prepaid data. I mean, I do like 750,000 rand a month in prepaid. I can't even take a credit card from a customer because I lose. It's the commission on the credit card is more than I make on selling prepaid. So these businesses are about having a good forecourt. All the other stuff is all white noise. If a guy comes, speaks to you, he's got a filling station for sale. Essentially, all you've got to be interested in is the forecourt volume. And then you need to understand what the split is between petrol and diesel. Because if a guy's doing 90% diesel, his GP number is definitely going to be less than a guy who's doing 90% petrol. I mean, that's the point I'm trying to make. You get that? Because diesel has always been deregulated. Diesel is much more competitive. The 93 is going to change the playing field now. Where guys are going to do exactly what they did with diesel with 93. That's my view. But it's going to create opportunity for guys, for people like you, because I believe a lot of people are going to say, listen, we are now selling. We're not playing this game anymore. It's a different game to play now, to be a discounter. Particularly if you've got a branded site.
Stevie, sorry, Louis.
Sorry.
Do you want to go first?
I'm going back to Natalie's question. So, if there are so many sellers, who's going to be buying?
So it's a remarkable thing. I mean, there's certain demographics in South Africa who are obsessed with filling stations. Okay, so I've been doing it for quite a while. I can tell you that in my years, you don't get great sites for free. Okay, doesn't matter what the market, what the economy is like, what the talk is, how negative it is. You never find a great filling station going for half its price. It's a remarkable thing. The guys who know this space pay money for good sites. I don't know where the funding comes from. I can't answer that.
What is that demographic?
So I can tell you that historically in my time, the Indian community are the biggest players in this space. Okay, they understand they're very good operators. They understand the cash generation of these businesses, and they do it. A lot of these guys do it as a kind of community investment. They generate money from multiple sites, and they just keep buying more and more sites. And they've got across the brands. You've got guys who are involved with Shell, with Total, but it's the same owners. And I can tell you, the great sites, you never find a great site going for half its value. I don't know in your experience. How people fund it, how they gear it. I can't answer. But the great sites always get sold.
Steve, my question was, we always hear about white sites and guys love white sites. Could you just maybe explain to us exactly what a white site is?
So when you say a white site, so it's the correct terminology is called a non-refining wholesaler. So the important thing to understand is that pre-1994, what happened was, I don't know who remembers Mobil in South Africa.
Yeah.
So ExxonMobil was one of the 10 biggest companies in the world. Mobil left South Africa, okay, in the times of the embargo. And the South African government were terrified. So Sasol was built with government funding, with taxpayer funding, because there was a necessity in South Africa to be able to fuel efficient, that we could produce our own fuel here. They were terrified that if refined product stopped coming to South Africa, you can't have an economy without fuel. So government put the money into Sasol. Sasol's technology actually came from America, and it was this technology of creating fossil-based fuels from coal and gas, not using crude. Okay? So other countries in the world have got that technology, but Sasol are the only refiners left in South Africa. The biggest refinery, Sapref, which was owned by Shell and BP, is closed in Durban. How that came about is that in 2013, they basically reduced the wholesale margin by half and increased the retail margin. And how government did it is they had advisors who said, listen, the fairest way to do this thing is whoever owns the asset is entitled to the return. So if you own pumps and tanks at a site, whatever it costs to maintain and upgrade those pumps and tanks, You're entitled to that in your margin. I can't own it and the oil company must get the margin. Doesn't make sense. So they went through this thing. It took them many years, and they basically reduced the oil company's margin by half. Then the oil company said, you want to be clever with us? We're not putting 1 cent into our refineries. Because how do you expect us to do it with half the margin? So many years ago, I don't know if you guys remember, when I started, diesel, which has got sulfur in it, it used to have 3,000 parts per million. Then it changed about, whatever it was, maybe 12 years ago, to 500 parts per million. And now Sasol have got 10 parts per million. So at 10 parts per million, it's 300 times cleaner than it used to be. So in the old days, you used to be able to smell, like when you were behind a diesel car, that smell of sulfur. You can't smell that anymore. But they had to upgrade refineries to get that product. So the oil companies said, listen, you want to take from our margin? We'll show you. We will not put 1 cent into our refineries, to the point now that the refineries have closed. So a company like Shell brings in every drop of fuel here is refined. So they've got these massive refineries around the world, particularly in Singapore. That's where most of Shell's product comes from. They will bring in refined product and sell refined product. So the interesting thing for you guys is, you know Caltex in South Africa? That's now been bought by Glencore. Do you know that? So one would ask, why would Glencore, a commodity company, buy essentially a retail brand? They've worked out that there's so much money to be made in buying the refined product. They deal in that space around the world. They'll buy refined 95. They will come here. So their wholesale margin of the 47 cents means nothing to them. They will buy it if fuel's 20 Rand a litre, they'll buy it somewhere in the world at 2-3 Rand a litre. They'll bring refined product here. They'll have what they call secondary storage, where they'll put refined product into tanks. They'll get trucks and they'll go out and deliver it. But this thing with their margin is so small. If you're buying it at source, refined, somewhere in the world, it's much more than the pump price is only for the end user. It's got nothing to do with the wholesaler, how much money they make. You know, when crude oil bubbles out of the ground in Saudi Arabia, and you hear that oil is $94 a barrel, that stuff's $2 a barrel.
Why would you want to have a refinery here then?
Well, again, I mean, a country needs a refinery. You need to have fuel security.
Is that why we only have Sasol?
No. So Petrol SA, which was the South African government fuel custodian, all countries try and keep fuel reserves. There's this whole thing where they sold billions of rands worth of all corruption. I mean, there's no difference at Petrol SA to Eskom. You know, then Gwedi Mantashe said that, listen, Petrol SA must buy Sapref. I mean, what do you think that thing's going to cost billions to buy that refinery? Then the oil company's not going to give it to them, and they don't have the money. So South Africa sits in a situation where they don't have refining capacity. They've got Sasol. Sasol now. If Sasol choose to flex their muscles now, okay? I mean, I was at a Sasol meeting last week where Sasol currently produce 1.5 billion litres of 93 a year, and they can produce 9 billion, okay? And they're saying we're the only producers of 93 in the country. Other people can import. But if you've got something going on in the world, whether it be geopolitical issues, whether it be bad weather, and ships can't bring that fuel here, what do you do here?
What happened to the Sapref refinery?
Shut it down. Shut it down. They're saying, listen, we're not putting money into it. The margin's not enough. They're trying to hold government over a barrel here. Okay? So they were spoilt. When Mobil left, it was called a capital pricing model. So in finance, a capital pricing model is whatever capex you spent on your business, you're entitled to a 15% return. So if an oil company decided to change their signage at a retail site, Shell, for example, make the yellow bigger than the red, that's capex, you're entitled to your 15%, and the motorist was paying for it, which was nonsense. So the government said, listen, those days are done. The motorist is not paying 15% on your capex. Now, you choose to buy a new office block, it's capex. Motorists must pay 15% for it. So they said, listen, those days are done. You're not getting 15% on your capex in South Africa. So that's what changed that. And now they sit in a situation where fuel prices are at an all-time high, government's under pressure. They're trying to do something. Who's going to pay the price is retailers and retail margin through this thing with 93. And my view is once they do it with 93 and the dust settles, they'll do it with 95. So they'll keep all the jobs. They're not going to call it deregulation. They'll call it re-regulation. They'll say that, listen, well, you can charge your maximum price, no problem. you know. But who's going to go and pay more when you can pay less? And the cost of your wages and your electricity and whatever, all your operating costs are going to go up. And operators are going to say, listen, when I say operators, fuel retailers, they're going to say, listen, we're done. We're out of here. We're selling our site. That's my vision of what's going to happen. And that's where it's going to create an opportunity for you.
Do you think they'll collude though and sort of just push the price to the maximum?
So you know, that thing with collusion, I mean, diesel has always been deregulated. When you guys drive home today, drive past sites, everybody will have their price advertised. See the variance in the price in diesel. A lot of people aren't aware of it. You know, I'm like R1.60 cheaper than anybody else in Zone 9C with Sasol diesel. R1.60 is a lot. You're not talking about 5 cents.
Where's your petrol station?
Yeah, no, but
Where is it?
I'm in the south of Joburg.
Oh, that's enough.
So you'll see the same thing, in my view, is going to happen with 93. Somebody's going to say, listen, I see opportunity that if I grow my volume, it's going to increase my GP. There's an opportunity here. I must run a lean business. That's what some people are going to say. And other people are going to say, listen, I can't do this. I can't do this discounting thing. I own this piece of land. I own this site, but it's not for me. I want to get rid of it.
Yeah, but the same supply and demand applies with the business. If there are a lot for sale,
Brings the price down.
You're not going to get the prices.
But again, I agree with you, but it doesn't mean it's not saleable. So it's willing buyer, willing seller.
Everything's saleable at a price.
So that's what will happen. You know, you can go and test the waters, feel the market, go and try and speak to an agent, and then decide, listen, I'm going to put it, go the auction route, and I'll have a reserve. If it's unrealistic, it's not going to be sold.
No.
Okay, but what difference is that with a retail property, with another commercial property? I mean, it's the same economic principle for me.
Yeah, but
The market will sort that out.
this is an unnatural growth in the supply, where you're saying people are going to say, listen, I'm out.
No, when I say I'm not trying to over dramatize it. You know, I'm not trying to. I just believe it'll be a defining moment for a lot of people, and they'll say, "Listen,
Yeah, but if it's
the writing's on the wall here.
natural,
The writing's no." But you need to understand that dealer-owned sites, oil companies' preference is to own land.
Yeah.
The majority of sites aren't dealer-owned. It's not like every site is saleable. It's only the dealer-owned sites which are saleable. I mean, the oil companies won't sell their crown jewels. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
They'll kick out operators, put in new operators, sit with the sites, not trading. They don't sell those sites. Oil companies, it's like a chessboard. They need to control the squares in the chessboard.
so does the oil company own the license, or does the operator?
No, so there are two
Operator
licenses.
owns the license.
There are two licenses. There's the supply license. There's a license there's a retail license and a wholesale license.
Yeah.
Retailers own the retail license. So if I own a retail site and I sell it, I need to transfer that license over to the incoming retailer, and that's done through the Department of Energy.
Yes.
Okay, but if you think the Department of Energy is a well-run government office, bad news for you. Okay, they don't know whether they're boys or girls. They are. It's just gross incompetence there. Okay, so that I mean, I'm not quite surprised that. I mean, they've kind of messed it up to the point. What used to happen was the fuel price change, which happens on the first Wednesday morning of every month, used to be announced on a Friday. Now you can be waiting at 2 o'clock on the Tuesday afternoon, and you still haven't heard what's happening with the fuel price change. So you can't get guidance in this industry. If you wanted to go to the Department of Energy in Pretoria and try and find somebody who can sit and give you a guideline and some kind of expertise, it just doesn't happen. There's no expertise there. You know, that they're the custodian of the industry and you have to have a license. Yes, you do. Do they police it properly? Do they police it that wholesalers aren't retailing? And I mean, there's this massive problem in this industry. Diesel has got paraffin in. So they've come from SARS, the customs division of SARS, and they do this test on your site. I mean, Sasol told us at this meeting that they can't, when they say they can't work it out, they have worked it out. While the paraffin volumes, they manufacture paraffin.
It's gone up.
Because people are mixing in the diesel. That's the only reason. You know, so a lot of these white sites, part of the reason that they're cheap is the quality of the product is crap. You know, diesel's much cheaper paraffine's much cheaper than diesel. So they blend it.
Is the white site where either the brand or the operator?
No, so the best way of understanding a white site.
Non-refiner.
So non-refining wholesaler.
Yeah.
So if you take the big brands in South Africa, you take Shell,
Not a retailer.
BP, Celtics, Sasol, Total. They're what's called refining wholesalers.
Yeah.
Okay. White sites are the non-refining wholesalers. The Fozers, the energy, So I mean, if you talk about Puma is actually the holding company, is also a very big commodity trader. So they see the opportunity that pump prices are massively high. There can be an oversupply somewhere in the world of refined product. We'll buy that refined product cheap, 95. We'll bring it in through Mozambique, which is how Puma do it. We'll truck it into South Africa, and we'll be much, much cheaper.
But
That's exactly how they do it.
They're the wholesaler, so they're the guys that minimum, they fill up the trucks and they've got that minimum amount.
So it was all smoke and mirrors. Their wholesale margin, where government said, listen, your wholesale margin. So the wholesale margin from the refinery to the time it leaves the refinery gate was the wholesale margin. But for the product to get to the refinery, that's not regulated. So if you can get crude oil at $2 a barrel instead of $91 a barrel, all the margin in between there is all yours. If you go somewhere in the world to a super refinery and you buy 95 petrol at a very cheap price, like Russia now are dumping crude oil, much cheaper than the price you hear on the radio. What you hear on the radio is this thing called Brent North Sea crude. So to get to what's called the basic fuel price in South Africa, they've got a matrix and they put in the exchange rate every day, the price of crude every day. The price of crude they put in is this thing called Brent North Sea crude. If Russia are selling it at 30% a barrel cheaper because of what's going on, and you buy that, and you put that into your refinery, you just make the extra margin. That government said, listen, well, you can't make more than 47 cents. They can't control your input cost. If you're buying crude cheaper,
So would
you
rather,
just make the money.
Would you rather own a white site or a petrol station?
You mean a white site or a branded site?
Yes.
Depends on volume.
So that if you own a white site, to make money, you don't have to do the same volume that a branded site has to sell. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, yeah.
So that is why there are so many white sites now. They are buying it. The wholesale price that they're buying fuel for is much cheaper. That means their break even for their site is much lower. They don't have to sell 300,000 litres to break even. If they're selling 200,000 litres and they can make money.
So why are we seeing more white sites then?
So if you go to outlying areas, there are way more white sites.
Okay.
So if you go to Mpumalanga, if you drive out of big cities, you cannot believe how many white sites there are. Even if you take in the south of Joburg, there are lots of these white sites. There are lots of these white sites. I mean, I'm not sure if sellers of white sites have come to you, not the big brands. I can't answer that. But have you seen that, an increase in that?
We've seen guys looking for sites, I mean, whatever. They're just looking for all the different ones. And the guys
Are you saying buyers or sellers?
Sellers.
No, buyers.
Buyers, there's definitely more buyers than there are sellers of those sites.
So that tells you something. I mean, there are more buyers. That's what you're saying. There are more buyers than there are sellers. Okay?
The guys from like Puma or them, they like buying a white site from us. But a lot of them, if you ask them to sell, they'll be like, no, I'm not selling.
So my view is that with the thing with 93, with the implementation of the re-regulation of 93, there may well be more buyers. There may be more sellers.
Sellers, yeah.
That's my view.
In the whites, in the non-branded.
In the total space. In the total space.
So it's not just diesel now.
It's not just diesel. Exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right. That's what I think is going to happen. And I do believe where a lot of guys still have the view that the government cannot do it. They're not going to do it to us because it's going to stick us out of business. They're going to do it. They're going to do it. And it's going to happen soon. They're under too much pressure with the cost of fuel. They're going to implement that as the first phase. I believe they'll do it to 95 as well. Which guys say it's impossible. They cannot do it. They're going to do it. They don't care about retailers and retail margin. They're going to say, listen, if you can't make it, sell it. If you can't afford to run your business, you need to get rid of it. And I believe to the point that companies like Shell made disinvest from South Africa. I mean, Caltex have already done that. Caltex have taken a view. I mean, many years ago, the head lease of all the retail shops at Caltex is run by Fruit and Veg City. You know, Fresh Start. So all convenience retail at Caltex sites, they've got rid of it years ago to Fresh Start. They said, listen, we're just going to concentrate in the fuel space. They now took a view with the changes. We're getting rid of it. They've sold it to Glencore, sold their business.
So if there are no refineries other than the Sasol, who are they all importing?
All importing refined product.
Refined product.
All importing refined product. So Sasol is saying that, listen, I don't know if you've noticed, all the oil companies in the last, whatever it was, maybe 5-6 years, have all got loyalty programs. Sasol have been the last one to come on board. Okay? And you cannot believe how competitive that space is. So I think what's going to happen in that space is Sasol will say, listen, we understand the plight of retailers and the problems with margins for retailers. What they'll do is their marketing will be, we'll give you 30 cents back a litre on the loyalty program if you go and buy 93. So they will cover the cost for the reduced margin and incentivize people to go to Sasol sites. They've got all the supply, you know. Things like that are going to start happening. You know, where the oil companies are going to work out, listen, we need to have our footprint to sell fuel. We have to have guys staying wet, in stock. You know, I mean, the interesting thing at the Sasol meeting, Sasol have got about 380 sites, okay? 150 of those sites are trade on what's called hard cash.
Are all the Sasol sites provided by Sasol Refinery? Or
No,
are they also bringing
so what happens is around South Africa, what people don't understand is that inland, all the oil companies use Sasol product. They've got service level agreements and supply agreements with Sasol, and then they'll tell you that they'll put their additive in. So inland in Elroad is the big depot where Shell, BP, they all fill up there. Okay, so that base product there, most of that base product can be Sasol's product.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Caltex will put in their additive, and Shell will put in. I mean, that's what they tell us. I mean, for me, it's also the biggest marketing bullshit. Okay, you know, I mean, how do I know what they put in my tank? If it's Sasol's product, if it's BP's product, if it's
all paraffin.
well, I mean, there I can understand. I mean, it would be a misrepresentation, you know, to be fraud. If Sasol put paraffin in their product, I mean, that would be fraud.
Yeah, but if you're saying you get Super 100 when you put this in, and you're not providing it, it's also fraud.
No, but I mean, when guys tell you, I mean, I'm not a motor enthusiast, but when guys tell you that at altitude you can't get performance because there's not enough oxygen. When you drive your car at the coast, you can feel the difference. Okay, you can put in the highest octane fuel you like inland in Joburg. You're not going to get the performance. When Shell tell you that this is the fuel that's used in a Formula One car, bullshit. The fuel that you buy at a Shell site, it's not the same fuel they put in a Formula One car. I mean, Shell don't advertise and guarantee that this was made at our refinery in Singapore. They don't put that in an advert.
Well, all octane gives you is a higher knock rate at altitude.
Okay, you know this thing better than I do. Okay, but I'm not a technical guy. All I'm saying is this thing around the marketing around the grade of fuel and performance. People are more interested in price, particularly now.
Sure.
Okay, so this thing that you know, you may have your diehard guy who only wants to buy a Shell because he's been brainwashed. But I'm of the view that if somebody else is a rand 20 cheaper a litre, he'll quickly forget about Shell and he'll go somewhere else.
So what's a hard cash site?
So what that means is, so when a guy buys a site from you, okay, and you sign the agreements with the oil companies are on what's called direct debit. You don't pay them, they take funds from you. So they ask for a fuel guarantee. That's generally to cover 2 loads of fuel. And then when they deliver to you, within 24 hours, they'll directly debit your account. Okay? So oil companies have changed in South Africa to what's called vendor managed inventory. That means you're on consignment fuel. So to try and free up working capital, they will keep your tanks full and you'll only pay for your sales. But they're too clever, the oil companies. So in the RAS matrix, that matrix which makes up the margin, there's a couple of cents per litre for holding stock. So they say, listen, we'll give you consignment stock, But we're now taking that part of the matrix, which I mean is correct. You know, they own the asset now, they're funding the asset, they take the margin on it. But when there's a fuel price increase and a fuel price decrease, you know, a price change, no one can manage your stock like you do. If the price is going up, it's the easiest way to make money in this industry. If you've got a lot of stock in your tank, as the clock ticks over, in 1 second, you make all that extra margin. I mean, it can work the other way when the price goes down, but then you need to try and run your stocks low. But the oil companies are all going onto consignment stock, which is freeing up working capital. So, I mean, at my site, I've got 5 23,000 litre tanks at a cost price of around 23 Rand a litre. You know, you need 2 million Rand to stay in stock there. So if you go to the consignment stock model, it frees up 2 million Rand of working capital. You may lose a bit of margin. I mean, I don't want to go into consignment stock, but that's what the oil companies are doing. So guys who have a debit that bounces, the oil company puts you onto hard cash. You've got to deposit cash into the oil company's account, and once that's cleared, they'll then deliver to you. So half of Sasol's network on hard cash. That tells you how hard it is for half of Sasol's network to operate. You'd only be on hard cash if you can't run your business that you've got enough free cash flow to be directly debited. So that can either be that you're a terrible operator or that you just can't make it. You know, you're battling to survive.
How do you get that list?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the
Those
cost
are the
of
best
storage
sellers.
for the fuel company is enormous. It's much cheaper for them to store their fuel in your tank.
Well, you know, they try and justify it, you know, that when there's times of price, if there's a massive price increase, for example, there's massive pressure on their fleet to deliver fuel. Do you understand? Everybody wants to try and fill up their tanks. Everyone wants to try and do it the day before or the day of a price increase. They can't do it. So they're saying that, listen, if we can own all the tanks, we can do the planning and the logistics around it much better than you can. Do you understand?
But then you'd rather not have hard cash sites, correct?
Yeah, but again, so there are two parts to it. You've got to have a site that can control your stock. I mean, you don't put 2 million rands worth of stock into somebody's tank. Now they try and steal from the oil companies, so they put in what's called ATG, which is automatic tank gauging. So Shell were the first of it here. They put in this fancy technology which measures every tank to within 2 litres, and they monitor it off-site in the Philippines. So 7 times a day, it's called polling. Technology monitors what's in your tanks, and somebody who sits somewhere in the world will say, listen, you need a little bit of diesel and a lot of 95, and a truck will just arrive and deliver to you. But you don't manage your stock. It's all automated. Totally automated. And they monitor your point of sale system, and every day they bill you in arrears. If you sold 10,000 litres of fuel, they directly debit your account that night for 10,000 litres. Totally automated.
I'm saying, which would you rather?
Much rather have, if you're a well-funded site,
Yeah.
I'd much rather manage my stock myself, because no one will understand my stock better than I do if they're doing, what's an example, if they're doing
No, I'm
roadworks.
not saying as an owner, I'm saying as Sasol.
So just let me understand that again. Are you saying, if I was Sasol in this current climate, I'd want to try and get consignment stock out there? Because fuel is hell of expensive, retailers need help.
So you want to get away from hard cash stuff.
I'm saying they would ideally like to get away from hard cash.
Then let us sell them.
No, but again, that's Sasol would have to say, listen. So Shell did it a few years ago. I mean, they basically divide their business into a pyramid. The top of the pyramid are their top sites. They basically cut the bottom of the pyramid. Shell, they cut their tail and they got rid of a lot of sites. They auctioned them off here at the Hyatt in Rosebank.
But I'm saying, sorry if I'm being cheeky, but like the people we approach, as Ronald said, it's these guys who on hard cash.
No. You
No.
can only approach dealer-owned operators. If a guy's a company-owned operator on hard cash, you can't speak to him. You need to speak to the landlord, who's a seller. If a guy is a retailer and he's company-owned and the oil company owns the site, you can't open a conversation with him. He's got no
would
power.
they run those? They wouldn't run a hard cash thing on a guy that
They
doesn't
do.
own the property.
They do.
they?
Sure.
But they're vulnerable because that guy can also take the money. And
So
come
that guy's got a very marginal site. The oil company owns the land. He's battling to survive. He had a debit which bounced. They now put him on hard cash. But the oil company still owns the land.
Now, what happened to the guy that I'm saying the guys that own the land themselves? You know, so not an oil company that owns
The
the
dealer,
land.
a dealer-owned operator.
Dealer-owned operator, yeah.
So
But none
just
of your
explain to me.
150 are dealer-owned. Cecil owns all the land of those 150.
How would
No,
that-
Cecil got dealer-owned sites. I'm a Cecil dealer-owned
In
site.
that 150
Definitely,
that are on hard cash.
definitely.
Those are the people we want to sell.
There would be some. There would definitely be some dealer-owned operators there. There would definitely be some dealer-owned
But would they
operators.
allow them, like I'm saying, you want a debit order system, they pay me, deliver. Would they
So,
take
so,
the charge
so,
of
so
letting
that platform and pay and deliver, whether you company-owned or dealer-owned, it's irrelevant.
Okay,
It's irrelevant. You can be dealer-owned and be on hard cash.
okay,
Do you understand?
Okay.
It's not their preferred way of operating with anybody is on direct debit. If you default, they put you on hard cash. But that doesn't matter whether you're a company-owned site or a dealer-owned site. You could own your land and default on a payment, and they put you onto hard cash. I don't know, does that answer your...
yeah, I think so. I'm just saying, there are a lot of guys, you want the money kind of first before they're delivering. Otherwise, they're sitting there with massive stock that's out there and the oaks don't pay them.
Well, let me give you an idea. In 2005, a load of fuel... So do you understand how a fuel tanker works? There's 6,000 or 8,000 litre partitions inside there. The biggest tanker you get is what's called a Q42. It can basically take 42,000 litres. Okay? And what oil companies try and do is they want you to take a full load. Their cost in distribution, if a truck can fill at a depot and go, the full truck deliver at your site, it's the best case for them. So Q42 in 2005 was costing about 187,000 Rand. That's what I used to pay. It's now about 1.1 million Rand. Okay? So every 2 days, if I'm busy, I need a delivery. So do you understand the cash flow implication?
Yeah.
And the pressure the guys are under? To the point that I believe a lot of dealer-owned guys are going to say, listen, I'm done. It's enough. I cannot do this. People want to buy these sites. I want to sell.
Stevie, how often does the RAS margins change? Is it once a year?
It's meant to be twice a year. So there's a bargaining council which represent petrol pump attendants. They do a 3-year wage negotiation deal. The 3 years is actually up now, and they're in the negotiation. So in September, what usually happens is there's a margin adjustment around wages, which is ring-fenced around wages. So it's not per site. They'll say, listen, we're giving you an extra 2 cents a litre. Whether you do 100,000 litres, you do 1 million litres. It's one size fits all. But it's meant to be around the increase in wages. Because government understand that with regulation and wages, we've got to have staff. You've got to have money to pay the staff. So it's built into the fuel margin. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So once a year in September, there's meant to be the ring-fenced wage increase. And usually in December, there's meant to be the OPEX increase. So going back to the early 90s, the University of Potch does a study as to what the benchmark service station costs are. Uniforms, repairs and maintenance. And they meant to make a representation to government, and government then change the operating margin accordingly. That bank charges have gone up and electricity's gone up, so we're giving you an extra 2.5 cents a litre. But that thing's also a mess. For 2 years, nothing can happen, and it's always in arrears. If you just take at your house how electricity costs have gone up. Okay, but the answer to your question, there are meant to be 2 margin adjustments a year. The one is ring-fenced to wages. The other one is around OPEX.
Okay.
But the current total margin is R2.28, excluding a rebate that you can get from an oil company. But according to the RAS matrix, it's R2.28. So it doesn't matter. So do you understand that the concept, that the big problem that fuel retailers have got at the moment? My gross margin on diesel is 75 cents, and I get a 25-cent rebate. So my gross margin that I make is R1. Okay? We currently pay, a lot of people are incentivized to use credit cards to buy fuel because they get rewards. We pay 1.72% in commission on a credit card. Okay? So my margin stays fixed at R1. As the fuel price has gone up, so my GP percentage has gone down. The bank, on their merchant service fee, is basically making on a litre the exact same amount that I make, just for acquiring the transaction. They haven't put more technology in, it doesn't cost them more. So it's nonsense. Guys are saying, listen, you talk about fixed margin and regulation in South Africa. Why do the banks have the entitlement to keep on making more for every litre of fuel that's sold? Doesn't change for us. So for a lot of guys, are saying, listen, we cannot deal with this thing anymore. I mean, what you're paying in merchant service fees is ridiculous. And your margin doesn't go up. But people say, but it's the same at Pick and Pay. It's not the same at Pick and Pay. At Pick and Pay, if you're selling that bottle of water and you want to look after your margin, you'll understand. You don't have to go to university to understand what inflation is. Won't cost 10 rand, it'll cost 12 rand. Because Pick and Pay want their margin. We can't sell a litre of fuel for more.
Yeah.
So all of these factors are making guys say, listen, we cannot operate in this environment.
Steve, 2 questions. So you say the RAS is set across the board, everyone makes 2 and 2.
That's set.
Set. Okay. And the rebate, how does that work? How do you get that rebate?
No, so that's a negotiation between you and an oil company. So in the RAS matrix, there's a line item which is called EC. It stands for entrepreneurial compensation, if you ever look at the matrix. So the entrepreneurial compensation was government's view as to what a person who's an entrepreneur and takes money and buys a filling station is entitled to make. All those other line items are recovery on a uniform, on cash deposit fees, repairs and maintenance. Those are real costs. But if you choose to put money into a filling station and not into a Nando's, you're entitled as a business operator to make a return. The other line items are a pure recovery of what your cost is. So in 2013, when this thing was implemented, the greed of the oil companies came through and they said, listen, okay, the entrepreneurial compensation, you wouldn't be an entrepreneur if it wasn't for our brand. We, BP, they've got one of the biggest brands in the world. We're taking 5 cents of your 15 cents. They've reduced our margin to 47 cents, but we think it's only fair that we take some of your... And then guys panicked, and some guys signed with BP and other guys didn't. Cecil took the view that, listen, in terms of the white paper, the entrepreneurial compensation is yours. You're the entrepreneur. You can have the full matrix, the full 228, and because we want your business, we want to give you a rebate. That rebate can be so much on petrol, so much on diesel. It can be a volume-based rebate that the more you do, the more you get. And they had the cleanest deal, Cecil. They wanted my business, for example. I still had 2 years left in my Shell agreement. I basically kicked Shell out, and I moved to Cecil. Only because they gave me a more attractive deal. So the guys who know what they're doing in this space, when they go to an auction and they're going to buy a property, they've lined up the supply. I don't believe you get anybody who's naive who will go and pay money for a site and then scratch their heads and work out, listen, who's going to supply me? A guy will do his numbers, come to an auction and say, listen, I can be supplied by Cecil. I normally get this amount of rebate. I think I can do this kind of throughput. And they do their numbers. I don't believe it works the other way around. Where a guy buys a site, now tries to understand who's going to supply me and what rebate am I going to get. I think guys have done their homework. That's my view.
This follows up to my next question, which
I don't know if I answered what you...
Yes, you did. This follows up to my next question, which I think is very important for us. How do we value the site?
Okay, so this is the interesting thing. When Ronnie sent me certain valuations, and I mean, Shell used to send their staff to my site to learn how the back office works. Okay, so this thing with valuation, you buy all of these businesses on future earnings. Okay, when a guy shows you pre-COVID what his fuel volumes were, I mean, for me it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. There's always risk involved here. Okay, and again, guys don't understand. There's got to be this split between a guy will tell you what he's doing in his shop, this, that, all the rest. The important things to understand is what the split is between petrol and diesel. That's the number one thing for you guys, because that's actually where the money is. And to understand at those historical volumes, what were the margins on petrol and on diesel?
Is that your dad's?
No, so diesel is totally subjective.
Yeah.
One operator can try and get 2 rand a litre, another operator will get 75 cents a litre. That's site specific.
So you have to put in that specific margin per petrol and per diesel.
So what you need to do is a bit of a due diligence. Say, listen, for the last 6 months, where are your invoices for diesel and what was your pump price? And you do the due diligence. It's not complicated. But if the margin works out at 2.28 rand for petrol and it works out to 50 cents for diesel, and 90% of the volume at that site is coming from diesel, you can't take an Excel spreadsheet, put in the total volume times by the petrol margin. You know, I've seen these things happen all the time. And then a buyer buys and he says, but listen, why are we not making money here? So there's not an answer that there's a one-size-fits-all here. You need to know what the split is between petrol and diesel. You need to know what the margin difference is between petrol and diesel. All the other stuff, the shop, you can't guarantee a buyer what the prepaid sales are. I mean, they try and tell you in convenience retail you should be making a 30% GP. That's what you should be making. I've got news for you. There are 3 components in convenience retail which give you between 83 and 87% of your sales. It used to be communication, which is now prepaid electricity and airtime. It's tobacco, and it's cold drinks. They call it non-alcoholic beverages. Those 3 contribute to the majority of your sales. People don't walk through a convenience retail shop with a basket and buy dog food and baked beans. That stuff just fills your shelves. People don't buy that stuff.
What is the difference between a litre of petrol and a litre of diesel at cost?
No,
You buy a litre of 93 and a litre of...
So whenever there's a price adjustment, you can have an increase in one product, a decrease in the other product. So it works on they've got this formula, they put in numbers every single day, and it works on this recovery system. Because they don't know every day what's going to happen, so they basically work in arrears with a price adjustment. So there's no answer to that. There's no fixed...
Today, if you bought a litre of 93 and a litre of 50 parts per minute...
So we sell 10 ppm. So again, I'm cheaper on diesel only because I choose... So the litre for litre cost.
Input cost. What's your input cost?
So the input cost is exactly the same. To operate a retail site, whether you're selling petrol or you're selling diesel, costs you exactly the same.
To buy diesel and to buy petrol?
No. Okay, so the operating costs are the same. To buy it, it depends on the price for that month.
Like today.
So currently now, diesel per litre is more expensive than petrol.
Sure. Okay.
But at my site, it's the opposite. The pump price on diesel,
Sure.
because I choose to take a low margin.
Yeah.
So Stevie, to sum it up, just so the brokers on the same page, you're getting R2.28 per litre as a margin for your RAS.
Yes.
So 93 is being re-regulated, so therefore you're losing on your margin.
Agreed.
So it's same as diesel.
So-
Therefore giving petrol dealer ownerships or incentive to sell.
So I'm saying that if you take whatever hardship is out there, okay, this is going to turn up the volume there. This thing with the 93. It's going to, so guys who are very marginal, this can be the final straw, where they say, listen, we cannot operate in this space anymore. We own the land, it's 3rd generation, I'm done, I'm out of here. They phone you, they say, listen, we're selling this site. Some other guy says, listen, I see the value there, I know how to operate that site properly. I'm good at doing this. I know how to discount. They're wasting money on salaries and wages. I'll put in solar. I'll put in whatever. And he sees the opportunity. Willing buyer, willing seller. You know what I mean? If the seller wants a ridiculous amount, he's never going to sell his site. But I mean, that's no different to what you guys probably deal with every day. You got sellers who are unrealistic, and somewhere in the middle you got to find a solution. You got to meet.
So we're going to be seeing different price ranges for 93 on the boards.
My view, that thing, so when that's implemented, it doesn't affect anybody at the coast. 93 is only an inland product. But 70% of South Africa's economy is inland. That's why they're going to do it. But it's not going to affect coastal people.
Electrification?
That I can tell you, in our lifetimes. I mean, I don't have to tell you about electricity infrastructure in South Africa.
No, electric cars.
So the oil companies overseas will play in that space of recharge stations. They're doing it already.
Yeah, even here they do.
Okay, but I'm saying, as far as market penetration with electric cars in South Africa and sticking filling stations out of business,
Not in our lifetime.
I would have to believe, and I'm a conservative guy, that it's not going to be a problem in our lifetime. You know what I mean? For the guy who lives in the northern suburbs of Joburg and thinks he's going to save the world with his electric car, I wish him the best of luck. Until he wants to drive that car from Joburg to Cape Town, I want to see how he's going to get there.
Can I ask a question? What would be your competitive advantage be with the re-regulation of the Highway 3? What will be your approach?
So that's also a good question. So the advantages with dealer-owned are massive, okay? So like the sales pitch if I were you guys. So first of all, what's happened with lower margins is guys say that, listen, we need to put in a car wash, we need to put in a quick service restaurant, we need to have a better customer value proposition here that makes somebody come to our site, and the margin's better on food than it is on selling prepaid, which works, makes sense.
That's your competitor.
So if you're dealer owned, you don't have to go with your hat in your hand to the oil company and say, listen, please, I'd like to put in perennial chicken here. And they say, who's perennial chicken? You can either have Debonairs or you can have steers, and how it's going to work is you're going to be paying steers 12%, you're going to be paying us 8%. And that's what it is. If you're dealer owned, you've got all the latitude to do whatever you want. If you want to put in a wishy-washy, if you want to put in, it's your business. All the margin is yours. But all the capex is for your account. But you own and run your business. You get the full margin, you can do whatever you like. You know, where oil companies waste money on repairs and maintenance, you can get the same contractors to come and do the repairs and maintenance at half the cost. You know, you don't have to use their electrician, use your electrician or your plumber. So that's the competitive advantage, is that you manage and run that business.
So what would be the most lucrative site? Would be a dealer-owned, mostly
Without doubt.
petrol?
No, so dealer owned. So historically, what happened in the business before the massive escalation in electricity and water, your biggest line item expense used to be salaries and wages, and then for company-owned sites, so when the site was owned by the oil company, used to be royalties. It was a massive number every month. You know, paying the forecourt rental and paying the royalty in your shop. So if you're dealer-owned, that disappears, gone. So now electricity, rates, taxes, water, arguably are like in the top three because of the massive escalation. But if you don't have royalties, it's a massive, just go straight to your bottom line. And then if you dealer owned and you're getting a rebate, so if you've got your income statement, you know, if your sales less your cost of sales, then you'd have other income, rebate income. That just goes straight to your bottom line, where no company-owned site can have that.
So in the dealer space.
So whether you dealer-owned with whatever your mix, diesel to petrol, there's no ways that any dealer-owned site, like for like, volume for volume, with a company-owned site can make less money.
Okay. And if the
I hope that answers your question.
Just want to find out then, so on an auction, then if the site license is coming to an end, does that create more interest for?
So a site license is always renewable. So you make an annual declaration to the Department of Energy, which is done every year, and you pay $500, but there's no fixed tenure on a site license. It's not issued for 3 years, 5 years. The oil company try and do it back to back. They'll give you an operating license, which so where I'm going with that is some oil companies are a third party in the agreement. There's a landlord that they contract with, and you as the operator deal with the oil company. Do you understand? So there's a third party landlord that actually owns the site, but you've got a company-owned site in that you're dealing with the oil company. Well, you only deal with the oil company. Yeah. You don't really know who the landlord is. It's got nothing to do with you. They sublet you. Those agreements, the oil companies have been caught with their pants down, where the agreement came to the end. The landlord now wanted to put the site on auction, but the guy had a valid franchise agreement with the oil company. So he lost his site because the oil company didn't have the agreements running back to back. And the oil companies were sued and lost a lot of money there. You know, you had a brilliant business. They come and tell you, listen, you're out of here at the end of the month. Why? I've got a valid franchise agreement for another 3 years. No, sorry, but the landlord has given us notice. We're out of here. So they've learnt a lesson there. So there are quite a few people, guys that I know, who own lots of sites. They don't operate them. They do deals with oil companies.
So Stevie, I know we've been going for a while. Just to quickly, in summary, how would you, as a buyer, look at the thing, and how would you value a property? And that's, I think, most of us, someone's already kind of hinged on that question. What would you look at to buy a property? What would make a
Okay, so let's go back a step. What I would do and I'm not saying it's easy and I don't know how to go about it, is every big oil company has got a property division. You need to get in there. You need to get in there and say that, listen, guys, when the industry's changing, if sites become available for sale, go to the source. Will you speak to us?
Like I'm
Make
saying,
the
so now you
introduction.
want to buy property.
Is that possible to do what I'm saying?
Yeah, you can get there, yeah.
So, I mean, there's one office at every oil company that deals with property. Do you understand? So for whatever reason, if they say that, listen, we're aware that we've got to have a company-owned site, the landlord now wants to sell it. It doesn't belong to us. We were dealing with the landlord. Phone that landlord. They tell you. That would be like gold. That you get in at the source. And those things are happening where landlords are selling sites. And I'm saying they're not operators. They've had an agreement with an oil company. The landlord now chooses to get out of it. And those sites will be available for sale. But I mean, I would think the best place to do that would be to have connections at the oil company's property offices, that when those things become available, you get the first part of the cherry.
I'm saying that in summary, how would you want to look at buying a property?
Oh, if I was a buyer.
Yes, you're a buyer now, you're interested, I'm only interested
in volume.
That's the question we've got to ask our sellers.
My due diligence. All I want to see from your oil company your purchases for the last year. I'm actually not interested in anything else. Anything else for me, you can window dress, you can put lipstick on the pig that'll still stay a pig. You can give me any numbers you like. You can give me any numbers you like. I just want to know your purchases.
But don't you value the business and what you're pumping in the property separately?
But that gives
So I actually don't agree with it. When you buy a property which is fit for purpose, you're not going to buy a filling station and then put up a 10-story building. So I value that property based on the throughput.
Just on the individual.
Finished. Whether guys tell you, if you buy a company-owned site through an agent, through a business broker, they generally charge you 36 months net monthly profit, excluding members or directors' remuneration. That's how those businesses are valued. Okay? Why it's 36 months is they're saying that, listen, you'll get a 3-year agreement from an oil company, and there's no guarantee that an oil company will renew with you after 3 years. So you need to be able to recover your money in 3 years. Whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, I'm just telling you how it works. Okay? I personally don't agree with it. So it works on a multiple of 36 months. That calculation is net monthly profit before members or directors' remuneration. So there's the provision in there for members' salary and whatever. Okay?
So it's income, gross income minus expenses.
Not minus expenses.
But
Net profit before tax, excluding director or members' remuneration.
Okay.
Not before expenses.
And just
After
36 months.
times by 36. So if you buy a company-owned site, that's the number you pay. Okay? If a guy squeezes you and he says, I've got the most brilliant site, and you pay 40 months, well, then you'll pay 40 months. When you're buying a fixed asset and you're going to own it, you're going to buy a filling station, you're going to have a title deed, you're going to own it forever. Okay? Guys will add, obviously, more value to that. But there's no formula. There's no formula. I know guys who bought dealer-owned sites who get their payback in 5 years. There's no formula that if you buy the asset, you have to get your return in 7 months. The guys who understand this business and have got the capital say, listen, I'm going to get a much better return on putting my money into this than leaving my money in the bank. And granted, there's the risk of sale and the security and the this and that. But guys see the value there.
That's the cost of doing business.
So, and that's why these businesses sell. Do you know what I mean? Where a guy says, listen, I don't know how you do it and how you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's not for you to understand that.
How do you value an operator license? Let's say you've got something that is...
So that's not, it's got no value. An operating license, you can't hold somebody over a barrel for the operating license. You know, they can get in a court order and interdict you. And you hear these stories where a guy he has an argument with the oil company, won't surrender the retail license. An oil company will sooner shut you down. They'll leave you dry that you can't sell a drop of fuel. And you see these things where a site closes and you don't understand why for months and months. I mean, I can tell you, you don't want to take a knife to a gunfight with an oil company. You know, if you want to get into something litigious and get into litigation with an oil company, they'll teach you manners.
So can you go back to that? Because I saw a site that, it's been closed for months.
There's definitely an issue there.
What do you think?
I mean, in my times of Shell, you know, being on the dealer council, and you have retailers that are saying that the oil company treated me unfairly, this, that, all the rest. Bottom line, you don't pay for your fuel.
Okay, so they screwed over the oil company, now they won't supply them.
No, the oil company will give you some kind of latitude. When the oil company draws a line in the sand, send an email to ENS, you get a legal letter. Go and see whoever you like. You will not get one drop of fuel. And again, whether that takes 3 months, 6 months,
Okay.
if you're thinking of the oil company, if you want to know who's going to go to business first, I know who I put my money on. You know what I mean? You're not going to, you can't, big oil companies, you're not dealing with Mickey Mouse. I mean, what their legal budget is massive. So when you see these sites that are closed for ages, it's an issue it came around money, that you couldn't pay for fuel. Or you did something stupid, like you bought stolen fuel. You know, but it's some kind of breach with a big oil company.
Yeah.
But again, if you can get the dealer-owned
Ones that are
landlords,
closed, yeah, they want to sell. Yeah.
that's where this thing probably has to start for me. For you, when I say, if I'm wearing your hat.
Yeah.
You know, and then if you've got a reputation that, listen, you've got a lot of buyers, you're getting good prices. I mean, what is the downside to the seller? There's no downside. What is the risk? I mean, you pay the marketing cost, you put a reserve on it. Why wouldn't a guy do it? I'm asking the question. I don't know. What is the downside?
Sometimes it's kind of insider trading sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like hard for us to... They've got their own little networks in there. That's the hardest area to
They're
check.
finding the stock.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I mean, guys who've got good sites. I mean, my site, I could pick up the phone today and find 20 guys that I know who'd be interested in buying my site. So unless, I mean, I suppose it depends on my level of arrogance. If I think that, listen, well, now I'm going to play those 20 guys off and I'm going to use you to facilitate that, I suppose I could do that. You know what I mean? The 20 of you all go to the auction and let's see, fight it out. And I suppose
That's
maybe
us, Sal. That's I think we've
so
trying to get to the
but
best
I mean,
price.
for me as a seller, I suppose what is wrong with it? You know, that I know guys want to buy my site. That's fine. You'll go to the auction and you'll buy it.
If you want top dollar.
No. And again, everything has its time. Everything has its time. You know, when you look at some of these sites, I mean, that site, that engine site up the road here, I mean, what guys pay for dealer-owned sites is unbelievable, I think.
Which one? Below?
Oxford Road. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, but I do think that in my years being around, it's definitely become more favourable to sell filling stations on auction. Definitely. And if you can establish yourselves as perceived experts in that space, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But this thing of getting caught up in what the valuation is and how much are you selling in cigarettes and what are you selling in prepaid and how many cans of baked beans are you selling? It's all bullshit. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. No guy who's a proper operator is going to argue with you that, listen, you know, the due diligence, the amount of dog food being sold at that site.
Did they ever work out like a correlation between petrol sales and the
They wanted to have it. Good sites used to be 1-to-1, 1 rand in the shop to 1 litre, is what they considered good sites. Now there are lots of sites, if you've got an added value, if you've got a KFC or this or that, where the contribution in rands from all the ancillary stuff is more than the forecourt.
Is it?
Well, you know, if you take prepaid electricity, I mean, it's massive rands, but you don't make money from it.
But if you've got a station and you bring in a KFC, will you see an increase in your fuel?
You definitely will, but there's no hard and fast rule. There's no hard and fast rule. But what a lot of guys have got smart with doing is saying, listen, I'm dealer owned. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to be like an oil company. So I will put in a KFC and take a royalty. I'm going to be like the oil company. I'm going to be a smart landlord. I'm not worrying about them stealing my chicken from me, but I'll take a percentage of the sales, which I think is if it worked for the oil company, why shouldn't it work for you?
So you sublet it to another.
Exactly right. So now he says, listen, I'm just going to take off. I'm just going to take off the top. I'm going to take a percentage of gross of the sale. I'm not going to operate it, and I think it's a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
You know, so if you guys get something, and you've got a relationship with KFC, for example, and you say to KFC, listen, we can put a great KFC on this site. From a landlord's point of view, I mean, it's like Christmas come early there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Put that thing in, you just take off the top. You become the oil company, which you can't do if you're company owned.
What's the split between company owned and dealer owned? You know,
There are quite a lot of dealer-owned sites, but the dealer-owned sites aren't in the big cities. That's the problem. When I say the problem, that's the reality.
Because they obviously hold their main sites. Right.
No, the oil companies in metropolitan areas generally try and own sites. So where you find lots of dealer-owned sites are like in outlying areas, industrial areas. And there's no shortage of dealer-owned sites. But I can't tell you. I mean, Shell had hundreds of dealer-owned sites. You know, it wasn't a handful.
So are any of the oil companies looking to increase their network in the metropolitans? Like,
Yeah, so again, you know, Cecil won't put money into land. They'll want you to come with a deal, ideally,
owner.
and they'll give you a brilliant deal. But then you must build a site and get the licensing and get whatever.
Yeah.
And then they'll give you a great deal, and you'll basically have what's called a supply agreement. They will supply you with product, and you've got to stick to the rules and regulations. They've got to have uniforms, and they've got to have... But they just want the volume. They don't want to have any of the other nonsense, which is right. You know what I mean? Arguing with the municipality and can't get the EIA, and all of those things cost money. You know, all of those things cost money.
And
But
even if the site is brilliant, the piece of land?
no, so Cecil currently have taken a view that they just want to buy volume. They're not taking money and putting it into developing sites.
And any of the other...
Shell will definitely buy. Engine have actually like kind of crossed over now where they're not so quick to I mean, well, the perfect example was this thing on Oxford Road. Engine were not interested in buying that at any price. They're not interested. Let somebody else fight over it. So Engine have kind of, but also, you know who owns Engine? Petronas. Okay? So they kind of, there's talk of trying to sell the business and get out of the business. And the big oil companies in South Africa, other than Sasol, there's no guarantee that they'll stay here.
And the rest of Africa, like with SADC?
Look, I can't speak for their strategy there, you know. But I mean, Engine is a cross-border operation. I mean, they've got business, you know, across the borders of South Africa. And I mean, Engine is the biggest network here. You know, they bought the old mobile footprint, which was big, and they're the biggest. They're the biggest. They've got the biggest footprint.
It's also very hard for those fuel companies to show a return on the land portion of the investment for their investment.
But you know, when you say that, I don't believe when the chickens come home to roost that they even look at it like that. When oil companies, they've not bonded, they're not geared those properties. All it's about is volume for them. You know, when Shell has owned the site for years and years, you know, and I mean, Broll used to manage Shell's properties, okay? I mean, it was a disgrace how it was managed, but they're not interested in what the value is. It's all about, if you've got, I don't know what the right analogy is, if you've got a site in Hillbrow or a site in Hyde Park, and the site in Hillbrow does 1 million litres and the site in Hyde Park does 200,000 litres, to an oil company, their great site is Hillbrow.
Absolutely.
It's just about volume.
Absolutely.
It's just about volume. When somebody will tell you, but you know what the average price per square metre is in Hyde Park of a piece of land, what difference does it make to an oil company?
The same would apply to an oil company. Would you rather buy a site or open another 3 sites that you don't own?
They would rather buy a site.
they'd rather buy than open.
They would rather buy and know what volume is. Then how long is a piece of
No,
string?
I'm talking about buying to own a piece of land. Would they rather own the piece of land or have 4 leases?
If it's an absolute cherry to develop a site, they'd probably look at it. But if they could see what volume was and they were buying the volume, known volume, it's much easier to do the business case for an oil company and get the capex to buy volume than to try and buy a virgin piece of land, get an EIA, do rezoning, put in electricity, and then you get the site and you don't do the volume that you thought. You know, in the time that you could have bought it, they changed road infrastructure, whatever. It's just there are a lot of variables. And oil companies are taking the view that, listen, we would rather just buy volume. We'd buy volume. We know what our margin is, we buy the volume.
Okay, Stevie, I'm going to have to, some of us have to go to meetings and that.
That was awesome.
So China,
Yeah, that was.
we
Thank you.
appreciate you coming here.
No. Pleasure.
What's your surname?
My surname is Garb, G-A-R-B.
Steve, just one last question.
Yeah.
You said that they prefer to use